This week we're going to be talking about the classification of voice and instruments. The composer has two basic mediums to make a musical composition. They have vocal music or they have instrumental music. On the vocal music, we subclassify the different types of voices. So for women's voices, we have the soprano, which is the highest. We have the mezzo-soprano, which is in the middle, and then we have the contralto, which is the lowest of the women's voice. As far as men's voices, we have the tenor, which is the highest, the baritone, which is in the middle, and then we have the bass, which is, of course, the lowest vocal sounds that we have. Men, however, have a special feature that they can do, and that is using their falsetto. Falsetto means a false voice. They are able to work on getting up into the high notes and get into the women's range. When men first discover their falsetto, sometimes they're taken back and they're scared of the sound that they get from their falsetto. But you guys have heard lots of rock music and popular music where people use a falsetto all the time. As far as the other classifications that we have, you will see that in your book you have the classification of the world instruments. Now, we do not use those in Western music, and we will not be using those for this particular class, but I want you to know them anyway, because they do become important, because a lot of world instruments have entered into the orchestra, into a lot of our popular music. In the world classification, we have what we call the chordophones. The chordophones are any instrument where the sound is produced by a string. So a Japanese koto or a Chinese pipa would be considered a chordophone because they are played with a string. Their sound is produced. That's where the sound is coming from, is from the strings. Second classification we have are aerophones. Aerophones are when the sound is produced by air, something you blow into. So the instrument, a bagpipe, we don't see those in our westernized orchestras or in our rock bands or anything like that, but bagpipes are played by blowing into the instrument, produced by air. Then we have idiophones. Idiophones are any instrument where the sound is produced by striking or hitting. Now, a lot of you may think that, well, we got percussion instruments for that. Yes, we do, but our percussion instruments are a little bit different in the division here, because these instruments include anything like a rattle, a bell, a cowbell that you hit. That would be an idiophone. When we talk about membranophones, that's a little different. The membranophones covers most drums, but not all drums. So, for example, on the island of Fiji, they do not have material or animals large enough to go ahead and stretch across a rounded or squared object to go ahead and produce a sound. So they developed what we call a slit drum. It is a hollowed out log with slits in it. And so therefore that instrument, even though we call it a drum and they play it just like a drum, that instrument would fall under idiophones, striking or hitting. On a membranophone, you have stretched skin, stretched membranes, I guess you could say, across a body. So your drums, most of your African drums are made out of animal skin. So therefore they would be considered membranophones instead of idiophones, even though you are hitting the drum with your hand. In the Western world, we have four families of instruments. We have the strings, the woodwinds, the brass, and the percussion. Of the string family, we have two types, those that are plucked and those that are bowed. Of the instruments that are plucked, of course, we have the guitar, and then we have the harp. Those are the two main instruments that might be played with an orchestra or are used more often than many other instruments. And when we talk about the guitar, there are classical guitars. There are different kinds of guitars. Not everything is an electric guitar as we think of today. And so those instruments can be plucked. Of course, the guitar can be strummed, but so can the harp. There's a way that you can go across the harp with your making what we call a glissando, hitting all the strings at one time. We don't see many people playing the harp, and that's because of its expense and, of course, its size of the instrument. And a lot of orchestral pieces don't call for the harp. It wasn't until the French started to introduce the harp into the orchestra. But of course, the harp, if we go back into Roman times or Greek times, we find that the harp was very important to their music. As far as the bowed instruments, these are any of the instruments where you're taking a bow across the strings in some way, some form or fashion, which the hair on the bow is actually made out of horsehair. And so you have the violin, which is the highest of the string instruments. You have the viola. The violin and the viola, if you see them playing on stage, you might not notice the difference because they look very, very similar, but the viola is larger than the violin. So the violin's like the soprano of the string section. The viola is like the alto of the string section. Then you have the cello. The cello is played by placing it between your legs, and so there's a peg that goes to the floor to help you hold up the instrument. And then, of course, you have the bass. And many times, most bass players prefer, rather than sitting on a stool, they prefer to stand up playing the bass. Now, I want you to notice in your book several ways that you can play, like the glissando, I said, the double stop, and then the pizzicato, that you're plucking the strings. I hope you will pay attention to that part of the book, because that's very important, because these instruments, the string bowed instruments, are very, very capable of playing all kinds of techniques and sounds with their instruments. The next set of instruments we have are the woodwind instruments. Woodwind, how they get their name? Well, at one time they were all made out of wood, and then the saxophone became invented, and it's part of the woodwind family, but it's never been made out of wood. So we start out with the flute. The flute family, there is another smaller instrument, or a small flute, called a piccolo. Piccolo means small. So you got the piccolo, which looks like a little flute. So it's played very close like this. And then you have the larger, of course, flute, and we have the alto flute, we have the tenor flute. So we can have different kinds of size of flutes, but mainly we see the regular flute, which is soprano instrument. It's the highest of the woodwind family. So the flute today is no longer made out of wood. The flute is primarily made out of some kind of metal. It can be made out of silver. It can be made out of gold. Of course, it can still be made out of wood. So there are different things that the flute can be made out of, but mainly we see it made out of some type of metal. The next instrument that we have down is the oboe. The oboe is the tuning instrument of the orchestra. The oboe is also what we call a double-reeded instrument. So if you look in your book, you'll see that the woman has, I think it's a woman, it could be a male now, playing this particular instrument. You will see that there are two reeds that are stuck together, and that makes the mouthpiece of this particular instrument. So there's two reeds that come together that they shape to make the instrument. Sorry, my cat's in the back here a little bit, deciding to go ahead and join whenever I start to talk. I live alone, so she didn't get to hear me talk much, and when I do, she loves to come up and come near me. So I apologize. Oh, there she goes. But anyway, so you've got the oboe, double-reeded instrument, and the tuning instrument of the orchestra. Then you have the clarinet. The clarinet is the single-reeded instrument. That's because it has part of the mouthpiece built into the instrument, and then you add one reed to that mouthpiece. So it's a single reed there that you add to this particular instrument. So we have that, and then we have, there's an English horn. An English horn is also a double-reeded instrument. It looks very similar to an oboe, except for it's got a more rounded bottom, maybe a Middle Eastern looking bottom to it, but it's larger than the oboe is. So you've got also the bassoon. The bassoon is another double-reeded instrument. The bassoon is a lot of times called fugato, which means a bundle of sticks. So it is an instrument that's got two canals to it that go up and down, and then the person sits and plays it with a strap under their seat that's connected to the instrument. And it's more of a thumbs instrument. There's a lot of notes that it plays on the one side with the thumbs, and then the other side you've got the other 8 fingers to go ahead and play the notes. It's got a wide range to it, a very, very wide range. We'll be hearing the bassoon quite a bit. A lot of times you hear the bassoon in cartoons. because it can be quite comical, and it can also do a lot of skips there. Well, then you come to the instrument of the saxophone. The saxophone, of course, is made out of brass. It was invented around the 1840s by a guy named Adolph Sax. That's where it gets its name. And he was looking for an instrument that you could play outside, because at that time clarinets were being played, were made out of wood, and wood expands, and whereas today we got plastic and it doesn't change as much. But otherwise, when you got an instrument that can expand and contract a lot because of weather, it's going to change the tuning of the instrument. And so on the saxophone, the reason why it is part of the woodwind family, and they stuck it in that particular section, is number one, it has keys. So you've got lots of notes that you can play. In fact, a lot of times clarinet players can play saxophone and saxophone players can play the clarinet, because there's some similarities there. And then also it has the single reeded mouthpiece. So when we get to the brass instruments, you'll see that that's not the case of the brass instruments. This instrument is just made out of brass. So then our next family is the brass family. In the brass family, we have four main instruments, even though there are many other types of brass instruments, but they kind of look and all look the same. They have a lot of components that are the same. The four main brass instruments are the trumpet, the French horn, the trombone, and the tuba. The trumpet, of course, we got almost like the idea of soprano, alto, tenor, bass, that idea of having four separate parts there, high, like the women's instruments, I guess, and the men's instruments, but not exactly quite that way, because anybody can go out and play any of these instruments. They're not gender. They were never made for a particular gender, male or female. Even though today we don't see too many men playing the flute, and we don't see too many women playing the brass instruments. In fact, in my day, it was rare to ever see a woman play a brass instrument. And still today, in our major colleges, it is, you will not find too many women who are teaching in the brass section. You see them teaching more the woodwind instruments. So it just depends. But I mean, we're kind of getting over genderizing, if that's a word, genderizing our instruments. But what these instruments, the brass instruments, have in common is that they all have bell shapes at the end. They all have lots of tubing. They're wound around. If we were to stretch them out, they'd be quite long. But then to make it easier to play, we wind them up so that they're more compact with that. They all are, of course, made out of brass. They all have valves on them, not keys, but valves. And the valves is a complicated system here. So for example, the trumpet has 3 valves on it, but each one of those valves can play more than one note. And they can play them in different octaves. So you have to learn to use those valves. It's not like on the clarinet where you can go straight down, like, C, D, E, F, G, so forth. Whereas on this, you may play this one and it will play a certain note, and you play the other valve and it will play other notes. So you have to figure out, but it's based on how you buzz your lips and how tight, the tension that you give that particular buzz on your lips there. They also all have spit valves. That becomes very important because there's a place, if you ever watched or had any friends who played any of the brass instruments, or you yourself played a brass instrument, you might see somebody going, and they're opening up their spit valve so that they can get the spit out, because if there's too much spit that gets stuck in that tubing, the instrument does not want to play or not give us a very good tone. The last family of instruments, the percussion instruments, we basically have 2 types. Those that are that have pitch and those that are unpitched. The majority of percussion instruments are unpitched, but of the pitched instruments, I'll start with those first, because there are a lot of pitched instruments like your xylophone. We even consider the piano. I got the piano back here behind me, and that instrument is produced by hammers striking the strings. So whenever it's used in, as a solo, but used in an orchestra, it's back there with the percussion instruments. So you have the xylophone, you have the marimbas, you got the bells, you got chimes. These instruments are capable of playing a melody. In an unpitched instrument, you are not capable of making a melody. So you have most of the drum family. So you got like the snare drum, the bass drum, you've got the claves, two sticks that you hit together. You got the castanets that you clap between your hands. You got the whip where it makes this like slapping sound. So you got those particular instruments that they have no pitch. It's a dead pitch. It's there, but it's not anything that you're going to be able to sing. There is one set of drums, however, that we consider to be pitched instruments, and that's the timpani. The timpani, you always need more than one. Usually they're in sets of 3, 4, sometimes more for the orchestra, and they are capable of playing pitched notes. So in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, he uses a timpani throughout, and he has da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, so you need 4 instruments here. But also they have pedals on them where it can be adjusted to where they can make several pitches. So a lot of times you'll see a percussionist or a timpani player back in the back, and he's got his ear down by the drum, and what he's doing, he's quickly tuning for the next part that he has to come in with, because it's going to be changed to what he was reading of the notes that he was reading before. So you got the timpani. Now, out of all of these instruments and voices, we have ensembles. Of the vocal ensembles, we put lots of people together. We have a choir and a chorus. Well, what's the difference? The chorus is larger. So when we sing the Hallelujah chorus, we usually don't use a choir unless it's a pretty large choir. Usually I'm thinking about 100 plus for a chorus. You want as many singers as you can, because these particular pieces of music require big, huge, boisterous sounds. On the choir, you can have 4 people and be considered a choir. You can have 8 people. You can have 25, 18, 15, 55 people and be considered a choir. Most of you in your schools, that's exactly what you have. But sometimes when you combine all the choirs together, say for district choir or conference choir, and you sang a piece together, many times you were doing chorus music. The difference is with a choir, you can get the diction much more exacting, whereas on the big, huge choir, it's the dynamics that we're going for a lot of times more than that diction or that lighter sound, because it's too heavy with a large choir. As far as our instrumental ensembles, I'll start with the large ensembles. We have the band and we have the orchestra. What's the difference? The orchestra has strings. Bands, there is actually a generic, because you've got jazz bands, you've got your rock bands. So they're kind of generic, and you might say, wait a minute, in a rock band we have strings. A jazz band adds a bass guitar. So you might say, well, they do add strings, but generally when we're thinking about, we're not going out, the bands were made for marching. They actually come from, the idea of the marching bands comes from Turkey, and it was the Janissary bands where they would like march for the larger instruments. The camels and the horses would carry the large instruments, and then the other people would walk and they'd be marching. And so, so when we think about bands in its early years, it was basically for marching. Orchestras, of course, I want you to pay attention in your book and look at the seating of an orchestra. The strings, of course, because they're softer instruments, we have to have many more of them, but one flute or 2 flutes can go ahead and pierce their sound over top of those particular strings. So look at the setup of those particular strings. As far as small ensembles for the of orchestral instruments or band instruments, please look in your book, because there's several examples of that. You can have a duo, you can have a trio, you can have a quartet, and out of the quartets, the most famous is the string quartet. We will be listening to some string quartet music later on. String quartets are made of 2 violins, viola, and cello. There's no bass. But each one of the instruments, and that's what we call chamber music ensembles. Chamber for small ensembles, when the king didn't want a full orchestra, he just wanted some instrumentalists to come in and entertain him after dinner, and he's in a smaller chamber rather than his big concert hall. He would pull these guys in and they would play, but each instrument plays their own music. Together, it sounds awesome together, and the composer, of course, knows what they're doing when they put these all together. But they each have their own line of music. Sometimes they are playing in what we call monophonic texture. They all play exactly the same melody, but they are watching their own line of music, and most of the time playing in harmony. Then we have quintets. You will see that there is such a thing called a woodwind quintet, but you'll see the French horn is in there. The woodwind quintet came in about in the 1800s, and all woodwind ensemble sounds very airy. So the French horn was added for sustained harmony underneath. So the French horn player in many of the earlier works, this is later, it got its solos, but otherwise it played sustained harmonies underneath to keep that airy sound from dominating from the music with that. Of course, and then we can have all different kinds of ensembles. Those of you who took anything to contest or saw your friends take ensemble work to contest, you can have a flute quartet, you can have a flute trio, you can have a clarinet quartet, so forth. But these are the main ones that are marked in your book. Well, as far as other instruments, we have the organ, we have the harpsichord, and we have the piano. And we'll be talking about the piano later, but just remember that piano comes from the idea that at one time, the keyboard instruments could not make nuances of louds and softs. And piano means soft, forte means loud, piano, forte, they drop the forte and it just becomes the piano now. So it was a loud, soft instrument at the very beginning. A very inventive name by the Italians, I would say. The harpsichord and the organ, we'll be talking about those instruments a little bit later on with that. Then we have, for all large ensembles, we need a conductor. If you have an ensemble of 100 performers there, whether it's vocal or instrumental, you're not going to let them decide how to do the music, because there's going to be fights on how it should be. Well, I think the phrasing should be like this. I think the phrasing should be like that. I think this is what Beethoven wanted us to do. So you need a conductor to pull this all together. The conductor also keeps them all on time. Now, you will notice in your book that there are several conducting patterns, and I just think that they're kind of fun to look at. But otherwise, you have the four main simple meters, and you got on duple, it's just nothing going down, up, down, up, down, up. On triple, we got down, out, up, down, out, up. On quadruple, we have down, in, out, up, down, in, out, up. Now, the conductors actually spend a lot of time to do that, on working on just getting those precise. And I know I don't have a baton in my hand, but on orchestras, because they are so large and they need to be, the instruments it needs to be more pointed in sound as to where the beat actually is, or an accent or something like that, the conductor will use a baton, and that's his instrument. I don't have my baton, they're still packed away in my house, and so the batons are weighted. They can actually put them on your finger and balance them out. And I actually had a student who made me a baton once, and he was upset that I wouldn't use it. And I said, oh, it's too beautiful. He made it out of wood and carved it and everything. It was gorgeous, and it was completely balanced. And so I said, I'm so impressed. So I've always had it hanging. And unfortunately, I haven't finished unpacking everything since my move a little over a year ago. So eventually I'll get it done. As far as the conductor's role, as I said, is keeping everybody together, interpreting the music for the ensembles. Okay, I hope that you will pay attention to the reading. As I said, look at any bold words that are in there, because you're going to be responsible for those bold words. Make flashcards, maybe write them out, maybe test yourself over them, make up test questions, and ask yourself about these, definitions. I'm always amazed at the students that have not been exposed to instruments. When I first started teaching, I hate to say it, but it's been over 40 years ago, But anyway, whenever I first started teaching, every student, by the time I got them in high school, I started out teaching high school. By the time I got them in high school, they knew the instruments. And they knew what they were. They knew what they sounded like. They knew many of the composers, because we used to have a really comprehensive music education for our students. And you met almost daily with these students, even in elementary school. And so I didn't have to worry about students not knowing these. Plus, when I first started at MACC over 25 years ago, every student knew the instruments because the majority of them played in band. I would walk in class the very first day and I'd say, how many of you played in band? And about 80 to 85% of the students would raise their hand. They played an instrument in band. Today, I don't see this anymore. I would say maybe, well, actually, I had classes where I'd ask the same question and nobody played in band or orchestra. So, so I know some of you are not as familiar with these, but do pay attention. In your book, you also have where they introduce to you each of these instruments, and you can play a recording and watch a video of this instrument and its sound, so that you can start learning to try to pick out some of these particular sounds, so that when we get to the listening assignments, it will be easier for you to pick out those instruments. So I do hope you will pay attention to those. Okay, I look forward to seeing your work for this week. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.